All right, can you hear me? All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. This webinar is about version 8 tech support. Okay, and what we cover here is basically what you see on the screen. We can go into greater depth if you have a specific question. Raise your hand. I've unmuted the audience so that if you are actually using a computer that has a mic, right, or if you're dialed in with your phone, you should be able to just speak up and I should be able to hear you. All right, so these are the subjects that we cover in this basic webinar. There are a couple of versions already recorded out on our YouTube channel. At the end of this webinar, you will receive an email with a link back to the recording of this specific session, right? Some of the other sessions do have, presented by different people, and they do often present different insights, right? So we try to cover the basics here, right? And at least get you a little further along in your knowledge of basic tech support for Retail Pro version 8. All right, so I'm already logged in, right? So this is my desktop or my home screen for the Retail Pro version 8. Couple of the first things that we talk about in this webinar have to do with what happens when you get a lock file, which is a reasonably common occurrence. Lock files can occur, and they usually say workstation lock file. Lock files can occur if you crash Retail Pro. So if you were to X out of Retail Pro with an X up here, if you got stuck and you had to task manager it off, generally you would leave a lock file in your workstation folder or in this folder right here. Should have a lock file. Oops, no, I need to be up one, right? So should have a lock file somewhere in here or in here, workstation. I am workstation 1, so here's my lock files right here, right? So these are lock files. These are workstation lock files for workstation 1. That's the workstation I'm logged in at here. And so if I cancel Retail Pro, kill it, instead of actually exiting or logging out cleanly, those files don't go away. Okay, and also if you are trying to process in or out, if you're multi-store, you can't do that if there's a lock file. And if you have a lock file when you're processing in and out and it's overnight, of course, it looks like your polling failed. So learning how to clear those is generally a thing that we cover here. And instead of going and manually finding these files and removing them, okay, there's a tool, right, called ProDB that is used, and it does 3 things. It removes workstation lock files. It's the place where you can change the indexing of your files, right? And it's also a place where you can change the field lengths on the files. So those last 2 things is not something that you use often, but you can use it to clear lock files, and that's what most people on first level tech support would use that for. All right, so that being said, you can get to our ProDB in Retail Pro, right? So it is on your tools menu here, generally. You can also get to it outside of Retail Pro. So I'm already opened up the directory where Retail Pro resides on my computer. Generally, if you got a computer from us, right, this will be the R drive and not the D drive, but you can follow the shortcut so that you know where it's installed, right? And so Retail 8 folder is where all your programs are, and the RPro directory is where all your data files are. Right here under Retail Pro 8, there's the RPro executable and a few other things. but for the most part, everything you need is going to be down under the RPro directory. Okay, and that includes some executables that you can access from outside the menu, right? So I'm going to sort by type so that all those executables sort together. Down here, we'll get past the let's see, exe, had a lot of data in this one, so it's kind of full of stuff. Executables down at the bottom. Applications. All right, so all of these exe files, these are all executables that come with Retail Pro. Most of them are called by another program, right? Either the RPro regular program, you can see reports, that's pretty self-explanatory. You can run the reports executable outside of the menu. What we're interested in right now is the RProDB. And RProDB, that's this executable right here. Okay, so if you need to, run it from the menu, you can do that. If you can run it outside the menu, you can do that, right? Same with Reconstruct, same with polling. Polling is called trans.exe. That's up here a little further, all right? So we'll come back to that in a sec. Okay, but if you are not actually in Retail Pro, you can always get to these programs from outside. A lot of times we use RProDB when we can't open Retail Pro for some reason. So we get into RProDB, remove the locks, and then we're able to log in to Retail Pro. All right, so whether or not you get to it from the menu or outside the menu, start it. If there were workstation locks, it would have stopped me and told me there were workstation locks. Did I really want to clear them? At 99% of the time, that's what you're doing in here, and you can go ahead and clear them. Okay. The only time you would not want to clear them is if somebody is actually using Retail Pro, and when if you would clear them while they're using Retail Pro, somebody could potentially log in again as that workstation. And it creates a little bit of a mess, right? So you want to make sure that if you're using this, you really want to clear all the log files. All right, so while we're in here, I can point out just a couple of the things that that RProDB does, right? So this is where you define your number of inventory rows, right? So if you run out of line items, right, this is where you can bump this up to 90,000 or 100,000 or whatever, right? So if you run out of rows, this is the only place you can change it. If you do have to change it, right, and then it reorganizes or reindexes your files here, right? And if you're multi-store and you do this here on the main, then you also have to initialize your inventory. So specifically, if you were to change number of inventories or inventory rows or price levels, then you need to initialize inventory through polling out to a remote. Okay, so if you have to change this and you're not sure what you're doing, give a tech call into the tech board, and they'll help you make sure that you get this done right and don't cause problems out in your remote. Okay, so that's part of what RProDB. The other part of what RProDB does, right, is define like length of field. Right, so in general, most people aren't going to mess with this. Once it's set up, it's set up. But if you find that, for instance, you wanted to use all 6 of the vendor code that you have at your disposal for version 8, then you could change this to 6. Again, that's going to re-index all your files here, and you will want to initialize your inventory out to remote if your remotes exist. Okay, so just keep that in mind. The other thing that this does is allow us to use different fields as indexes. So in version 8, we are restricted on how many fields we can use to index on, particularly in the inventory. Okay, we've chosen here to be able to index or sort description 1, attribute and size. Those are all the fields that define a style, right? And we've added description 2 and vendor code here so that we have those available in order to sort on those in our inventory list. All right. Receipts, most people don't change this too much, but this in the receipts, the POS receipts screen, what can I sort by in those fields? Most people don't mess with those. All right, so again, the basics in here, if you're just using this to remove lock files, you pretty much can keep yourself out of trouble. Okay. Anything else in here, if you're unfamiliar with what this does, get a tech looking over your shoulder the first time and make sure you get it done properly and that you're not causing yourself problems at remotes. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and click OK here. It has a little scary message here that says your data file structure will be changed. We didn't actually change anything, but every time you go in here, you have the potential for changing your data file structure. So it is going to warn you that might be a possibility, right? So we didn't actually change anything. We remove locks if they exist, and we're done with our ProDB. So it's a simple little tool. As long as you're using it, like I said, for removing locks, you can pretty much stay out of trouble. And that our ProDB exists at mains and remotes. So if you have a problem at a remote with a workstation lock, you can get into our ProDB, remove the locks, and get on with your using Retail Pro. All right, so if we have some kind of problem, older versions of version 8 had, particularly in Windows XP, had problems with what we call memory leaks. So you get this error called a range check error. That's a memory error. And so the fix for that was reboot the computer involved, right? And so if you're getting those kinds of errors, reboot the computer involved. If they continue to happen, okay, then a lot of times a reconstruct is the next step. So if you are, and reconstruct can come in a relatively safe form, right? But the key to reconstruct here is you need to be totally out of Retail Pro in order to reconstruct. Okay, so I can start reconstruct from here, but if I'm in inventory like this, right? So if I am looking at the inventory screen, I have this file open. And so Reconstruct needs to have exclusive access to this. So if they don't have exclusive access, they can't, or if Reconstruct doesn't have exclusive access, it can't reconstruct this file. Okay, so if I try running Reconstruct while I'm sitting in here, and I would have to launch it from outside. Okay, so if I go back to my Retail Pro 8 R Pro folder, right, and I launch Reconstruct from here, okay, it looks the same as it looks if I launch it from the tools, right? But if I launch it from the tools, right, then I'm out of the all the files that need to be indexed, so I can't show you what the errors look like. So before we actually run this, we'll go through, how you use this tool, right? So it's got a couple of modes. So where it says Reconstruct Mode here, you can just test, right? Some people do this just to see if they've got any problems, if they have a lot of issues with, people logging out or killing Retail Pro incorrectly and breaking files and stuff like that. They might test this, once a week, once a month, whatever, just to see if they have any problems they need to fix. Okay. When you test it, you don't need to kick everybody out because you're not really fixing anything. It's just reading the files, right? Reindex only means I know I probably have problems, so just reindex that particular file. Okay. That is different than a full reconstruct where it reads every element in your data file and builds a new index file. This will just reindex the stuff that's already in your index file. So it may not be as completely effective, right, as a full reconstruct. So we always show a full reconstruct in here because ultimately, if you're in this tool, it's probably because you need to do this. All right, so down here in the file categories, this is where you choose what to reconstruct, right? And so there's several different sections, right? So if your problem, right, is a sales file, so this is typical of what happens is you have the POS sales file open and somebody kills Retail Pro, or you lose power, or whatever. That's going to break, quote unquote, your current sales file, right? So what you might do is you might go to the transactions here, find your current sales file, okay, and I got like lots of old history right in here. So we're going to go past the TR files. Those are your transfers. Okay, to the SA files. The SA files are your sales files. Way past. Actually, we'll just subsort that. Okay, so here's your sales files. Here's the sales file that I created today, right? That's the one that's probably broken. This one doesn't happen to be broken, okay? But if you needed to reconstruct that file, okay, you find the file on the list, right? You click this arrow over here to stick it over here. Once you get it over here, you click the Start button. Okay, these are all the settings that are probably already set. They're the advanced options down here. Generally speaking, you're not going to change those. Okay, it's going to go take that file, it's going to reconstruct it, and if you get this where it says no fatal, it doesn't have any errors up here on the top where it says finished, you're good to go and you can close. Okay, so reconstructing a sales file, as long as you're not sitting on it, you can see that is a pretty simple thing, and that's one easy thing that you can do when you're if you start Retail Pro and it says your sales file index is broken, it gives you the file name. You go into Reconstruct, you find the file, you reconstruct it, and you're off to the races. Okay. More often than not, your file is broken somewhere in inventory. Okay. And so I'm sitting in the inventory file behind this menu right here, right? So I'm sitting in the file, okay? And so if I choose to, let's see, do this, okay, and this, okay, and then this, okay, and then let's stick prices in here too. All right, so if I get all of these over here and I do a full reconstruct on these, it should throw some errors because I actually have the file open. So I have all 4 of those files open just because I'm sitting in the inventory. Okay, when I reconstruct, right? So if I close this, okay, and then I go back out here to this screen, right? So if I'm at the main screen, okay, that's the same as being out, quote unquote. I don't have those files open. Come on now. Okay, so if I go right back in here and I reconstruct those files again, right, I should not have any errors unless I got it open someplace else. Right, so this is going through the DAT file, right? So invn.dat, that's your data file. It's rebuilding the IX file, which is your index file, right? So if I go, when we're done with this, and make sure we don't have any errors, right? So finished, no errors, close, everything's good there, right? So what we've just done, okay, is let's sort by date modified, right? So if I sort by date modified, get all the way up here, right? So here's the DAT file that we just finished reading and rebuilding the index for, right? And then same with inventory DAT and an IX file. So these are the files that get rebuilt when you reconstruct, right? So if your index is broken, sometimes your file will still work, but you can't look things up very well. Sometimes you'll run into an error that won't let you through all the way. So Reconstruct is the tool that helps you deal with those types of things. Reconstruct can be scheduled. Okay, we do have some people who put Reconstruct in their scheduler because they have so many problems with polling and getting bad indexes and people exiting out of Retail Pro and so forth. Right, that can be scheduled. If you're interested in doing that, we advise you to get with a tech and make sure that you get it set up properly so that it doesn't interfere with your polling cycle and all that other. And maybe we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to the actual scheduler portion later on in this webinar. Okay, so those two tools, our ProDB and Reconstruct, are the front line on fixing things that are indexing, type of problems. Pretty simple to run, pretty straightforward, pretty safe, right? For someone who if you know how to get to Reconstruct, as long as you remember you have to get everybody out of Retail Pro in order to reconstruct the files, then you're pretty safe. All right. The other thing that we talk about in this webinar is workstation files, right, and shortcuts, right? So here's my shortcut here for my Retail Pro, right? If I open this shortcut up, look at properties, okay, the two things that are, important, the start in, right, is not absolutely required, but if you use any kind of plugin or customization, anything like that, this is good to have. So we always advise people, right, to have the start in point to wherever your Retail 8 is installed. Okay, this is where the executable runs from. You might see in some cases this on the end. Okay, so that defines the workstation. That's not the only way you can define the workstation, but you might see this in your shortcuts, whether we set them up or somebody who likes to define their workstations that way set them up. It's not required because there's another place on the system where you can set the environment variables. So I'm going up to my properties for my computer. Okay, and I go into advanced system settings, and here under environment variables, so this is Windows 7. Okay, Windows XP is similar. Most of you are probably phased out of Windows XP by this time. If you're not, then if you look in this bottom section, it's very similar in XP and 7. And I look down here to RProWS, you can see that. That's an environment variable that my shortcut inherits. Okay, it only applies to Retail Pro. So if your shortcut does not have your workstation designated on it, this is where it's coming from. Okay, so in 8 workstations, you're licensed for a fixed number of workstations, and usually you have either the shortcut, right, or the environment variable that defines what workstation you're at. Okay, and when you log into that workstation, okay, in the on the server, your Retail Pro 8 server, in the Retail Pro 8 RPro directory, right, there is a workstation folder. I had kind of checked that a second ago, but we're going to go review that again, right? So in wherever Retail Pro is installed on your server, right, in the RPro directory, there's a folder for every workstation that you're licensed for. I got a lot of licenses on this particular setup, okay? But if your licensing is for 6 workstations at your main, you should see a folder, workstation 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and sometimes if you run Retail Pro on the server, they will set it up as workstation 99 or workstation 100, and that's a personal choice that someone may have done on your system, but it is something that you could actually do. Okay, so each of these workstation folders, okay, actually has some setup in it. These are the screen layouts that you look at, right? Those are unique to workstation. You've got some print setup, workstation preference things, and we'll go look at that a little bit later, right? So there are files in here in this directory that are specific to each workstation, and if a lot of times these files will go corrupt. Okay, layouts go corrupt. So if you need to get a fresh set of layouts, you can rename the directory in here. You log into Workstation 1, it's going to pull a fresh set of default layouts. Different tricks like that work. So you can see I have layouts old and old layouts here. I've done that a couple times on here. Layouts Bob, right? So copy the old, rename the layouts folder, run Workstation again, and it'll pull a new set. Right? So there's some tricks like that that we use. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close out of here. Okay, so the shortcut, right? Sometimes if you are, if you're on, if this is not your main, right, and you're on a workstation 2, 3, 4, etc., and that workstation is networked, right? So on your client workstations, you have a shortcut, right? And commonly what happens is that shortcut disappears, right? Because you tried to access it without the network being up. So for whatever reason, when you go into launch Retail Pro, the network's not up, it can't find the Retail Pro database, right? So sometimes it will throw your shortcut away. Right, so we teach people in this webinar how to reestablish your shortcut. Okay, so you would go to the network drive. First, you have to reestablish your connection to the network drive. And the easiest way to do that is if you open up your My Computer icon. If you have it, you should see network location down here. Now, mine's not on a network drive. Mine is local. But for the most of you, if you're on a workstation 2, 3, 4, whatever, right, you'll have an RPro drive here. And if there's a red X right there on the RPro drive, then you want to double click on it, okay, and get it opened up. Once you get it opened up, okay, let me get down here, you get to the Retail Pro 8 folder, right, and here's the rpro.exe, right. So if you have the rpro.exe here, right? You can establish a shortcut just by right-clicking on it, and then send to desktop, create shortcut, right? This works in, all of the windows. Okay, so I've got a shortcut right here, and pull it over here is where you can see it, right? And so that creates a shortcut without the workstation, right? Which is okay, as long as your environment variable on this computer is, it matches the right workstation. If you're not sure, right, go ahead and add your WS :1 to whatever, right? You just want to make sure that if you're doing this, that you've got the right number. Because if you tell the system this is WS2 and you use the shortcut, that's what it's going to think. So if this is not WS2, when the real WS2 logs in, then they'll be fighting over this, right? So I'm going to throw this away so I don't confuse myself. All right. So I don't want to land the computer up there. I want it up there. All right. All right. So shortcuts. That's one thing that we talk about here, because that is a lot of the tech calls that we get are, I lost my shortcut, I don't know what to do. Right, so short answer, make sure your network drive exists, right, and that it's connected. If there's a red X there, double click on it, and that should open up your File Explorer like this. Okay, find the rpro8.exe, right click, create shortcut. Okay, and then you should be good to go. All right, one of the other things that we talk about are backups, right? So backups, we cannot emphasize this enough, right? You set your backup up usually when you start up the system, and if you're not checking to make sure that your backup is functional, then you might be caught short if something really bad happens, right? So for version 8, we just kind of review a little bit about how, what needs to be backed up, right? And generally with version 8, you would have a program like NovaStore or iBackup or some kind of utility where you would set up a directory, right? Here's the directories that I want to back up, and you should be backing up to, right, a portable hard drive, right, where you have 2 of them and you trade them out every once in a while, week, month, something like that, and take the second one off-site, put it in a fireproof safe. You can also back up to the cloud. If you're backing up to a cloud, then all you really need to do is monitor to make sure that it's actually working, right? So whatever program you have that backs up your Retail Pro files, make sure that you're monitoring it to make sure that it is actually backing up. Because if you lose your server, right, that's our only way of getting the data, right? If you have remote stores, right, sometimes we can put the data back off the remote stores, but it's a painful process and usually pretty expensive. Backups are critical. Having something off-site, which means not on this computer. If you're doing a network drive backup, make sure that that network drive backup, also has some kind of cloud or, some way to remove it off of there. We have had a spate of ransomware encryptions, right? With version 8, if you get ransomware, it doesn't actually attack the data files, but that's no excuse for not having a backup and having an off-site backup, right? The backup is your best defense against any kind of ransomware or virus encryption or anything like that. So make sure you have it. Make sure you have one that's off-site, which means separated from this computer, and that you're checking and monitoring it to make sure that it's actually functional. Now, as far as the files go, all you really need is the RPro directory, but generally this is not very, not very heavy, right? It doesn't take up a lot of room, right? So if you have the option, right, we tell people, just take the whole Retail 8 folder, right? Don't pick and choose. If there's a bunch of stuff in there that does not need to back up, there's a file or a folder called SecureDAT. Sometimes that gets pretty big. You can skip that one. But if you back up the whole Retail Pro 8 folder, right, you've got your doc designs, you've got your reports, you've got, your screen layouts, you got your workstation folders, you got everything, right? And if that folder is backed up off onto a portable hard drive, or it's backed up into the cloud, the server could, explode or, burn completely up. And all we do is get a new server, install Retail Pro, and drop that backup right on it, and you're done. You're off to the races. Okay, so backup's very, very important. We mention it probably too often for most of our customers' tastes, but we do find that people have a tendency to get complacent about them, and we don't want that to happen to you. We have had people where they didn't know their backup wasn't working for 6 months, and that data is gone. There's no way we can get it back if you don't have a backup and your primary server dies. All right. Next thing on the agenda when we talk about basic tech support is, problems with hardware, right? So, if you're having problems with a piece of hardware, it could be driver, it could be a lot of things. Step number 1 in doing something like that, after checking the obvious here, is it plugged in? And, we have people who, berate us when we ask that, but we're not there. We're not, sitting in front of it. Apologize to the person that that's on the other end and say, please check to make sure it's on, right? Turn it off and on. If, and we're talking about peripherals now, or monitors. Turn it off and on, and make sure that the cables are seated properly before moving on to step B, step C, right? A loose cable, right, can cause, printers not to work, monitors to look like they're dark, It could be the power cable, it could be the data cable, which is usually USB in this case. Okay, so checking the cables first, right? And if all the cables are good, doing a basic reboot of the computer. Now, if this is the Retail Pro main computer at a store, something like that, yes, you're not going to be able to use Retail Pro while we're rebooting. Okay, but if you're having problems with a driver or printer spooler or something like that, a reboot can often get you there faster than trying to troubleshoot it. So reboot, wait till it comes back up. Usually check your power cables before you reboot. And then we include this little dump a printer thing, because a lot of times when a receipt printer or something like that locks up, there's a potentially a bunch of Windows tasks, right, waiting for the printer. So the printers in Retail Pro all come from the spooler, right? Let me see if I can open the spooler here just so we can see what we got. Right, so here's my devices and printers here. So all printers that Retail Pro uses have to be defined in Windows in order for us to use them, right? So that's a receipt printer. I don't physically have that attached, so you can't see it. But if that printer is stuck for whatever reason, and you turn the printer off and you turn it back on, and it's still stuck, and you go into Windows, right, and see if you've got stuff stuck in it, right? So these things, right, you could go into the Windows spooler, right, and cancel all the documents. Okay, so if something's stuck, right, that should unstick it. Okay, if it allows you to delete those things. Sometimes it doesn't allow you to delete them. There are various reasons for that, but that's the first thing to try, right? So if you turn it off and on and it's still not printing, go in here, see if it's online, right? So this one knows it's offline because I don't physically have a printer here, right? But if it says it's online and there's stuff pending and it looks like it's stuck, you can try deleting it all out of there, turn it off and on again one more time, right? And then try to send something out of Retail Pro, right? So go back into Receipts, Print, all right, and print here. I don't even know where this goes anymore, right? It goes into that one, right? So if I send this, it of course is going to get stuck in my print spooler, right? Because I actually have no printer here. But send it again. If it prints, you're great, right? If it doesn't print, then maybe you got to dig a little deeper to figure out what's going on with your printer spooler, right? So there is a dump mode on most of those printers, right? So if something's actually stuck in the printer, right? If you turn the printer off, hold the feed button down, which is usually on the top. Keep holding it down while you turn it on. Usually you'll get like a barber pole printout on the, it's called a dump. And that tests the printer, and it also usually clears the memory, right? So if you do that, it'll print a bunch of gobbledygook looking stuff. When it's done, turn the printer off and on, and try sending something to it again. Okay, so that's frontline tech support on dealing with the printer. Tag printers do something similar, right? And usually the dump mode in a printer is turn the printer off, hold the feed button on the top while you're turning it on. Okay, let go. It prints a bunch of gobbledygook. Once it's done, turn it off and on to take it out of dump, and then try to print again. All right, so the last thing we talk about hardware-wise is going through Workstation Preferences and just kind of reviewing what's in there. So Workstation Preferences are, okay, before we go into there, I just like to point out System Preferences, you can only get into, right, if everybody's out of Retail Pro. You can look at it, okay, if people are in Retail Pro, but you can't change anything, right? So that's that's a limitation in version 8, right? You can't go change system preferences while you're actually using them. That file is locked. Okay, so if I click on System Preferences here, I don't have any other workstations in Retail Pro that are looking at them, so you can go into here, change what you need to change, and save it. Okay, if you try to get in here with people in Retail Pro, it'll tell you, it gives a big warning message. You can still get in here, you can still look at stuff, but you can't change things. Okay. All right, so if you do need to change something in System Preferences, you have to kick people out. Another useful tool that a lot of people are not aware of, this user info on the side here. If I click on user info, if there are other workstations that are in Retail Pro, it'll show the number here. It's not going to show this one because we're running this from this one. It says, yeah, you know you're in this one, right? So other workstations at this locality, right, that are in, you can say, see that there's a workstation running, you can go get that person out, launch this again, and so you have, until you have this clear. Once you have that clear, then you can do your thing with either the system preferences or the ProDB or the scheduler, right? So that's a handy tool to make sure that everybody's out before you try to run a tool, right, where you need everybody out in order to run it. All right, so we go through workstation preferences here, kind of at a high level, talking about what's in there, because a lot of people, they get this set up and then they don't realize what's actually in here and what can get messed up. Okay, so first, the paths, right? These are important. If this path changes, right, on a workstation by workstation basis, you could be putting your sales files in particular in 2 different places, which could be painful because then you have to merge them, and usually you would need one of our techs to do that. So you do not want to mess with the path in here. This is set up. If you have a functional system, it's doing what it's supposed to do, so don't change it. Okay, this right here, this is a path to a file that you can put on the screen, right? So this happens to be our Big Hairy Dog logo, right? So this logo right here, right, that setting in Workstation Preferences is how I got this on the screen, right? So you can put a logo here. You can link to a web page. You can put a to-do list up here, a Word to-do list, right? So there's lots of variety in the things that you can put up here. It doesn't just have to be something static. Well, it's going to be something static, but you can also embed links in a Word document. So, click here for instructions of the day, type of thing, right? So there's, a different variety of things that you can put in here. And if you need help doing that, let us know. We can, get on and find out when we know exactly what you want to do, how to actually get that job accomplished. All right, so manuals, right? This is the path to the manuals here up on your screen right here where it says e-manuals, right? If you click on that, that gets you down to, I believe it gets you, yeah, HTML, where you can get down into, drill down and find the PDFs that come with Retail Pro. This is all the stock, basic, out of the box, say no, okay, PDFs, essentially. You can go drill down to these PDFs on the, in the files, right? I can show you where those are. Ask me later. Say no. All right. So I have Chrome as my browser, and it's a little unhappy about that. Okay, but essentially these are PDFs that come with Retail Pro, how to run physical inventory, how to look at polling. There's one on our ProDB if you want to investigate further on what the settings are and all of that kind of stuff. This is all available for you. I'm going to minimize that, but that's all a way that you can access it from inside Retail Pro, and this is another thing that you can access from outside Retail Pro. So I'm in my Retail Pro 8 directory, and e-manuals here, docs, right? So here's all those PDFs, right? So if you want to go hunting these down on your own and you don't want to actually use your Retail Pro workstation to do it, you can get in here and find these that way. All right, okay. So we're gonna go back in here, right? Some people use this automatically lock out. So this is a setting. There's a high security setting in the system files. I have that one turned off because I don't want to log in every time I do a receipt. Okay, but if you want them to be able to walk away from the from Retail Pro without logging out and keep your keep the screen safe from somebody just being able to walk over and push the pop drawer button, for instance, right? Then you can use this automatic lockout. Okay, don't set it for shorter than 5 minutes. We've had instances where people will, when you're using the automatic or automated credit card or integrated credit card with Cayenne, right? Sometimes it takes a minute or so for the customer to actually fish their credit card out of their wallet, get it put in the chip, get the chip read, get the authorization back to Retail Pro. So set this, with enough time to allow for those kinds of things. You don't want it to be locking you out in the middle of dealing with the customer, right? So if you're working with a customer and you've got a receipt partially started, right, and the customer, customer is like hemming and hawing about something else, right, and that's gone on for 5 minutes, you can get back in to the transaction as long as you haven't started the credit card cycle. The credit card cycle is the only place where this really creates a problem. Okay, anyway, so no less than 5 minutes. Use it if you want to. Don't use it if you don't need to. All right, so let's see. What do? We go and look at the scheduler. Okay, so we're going to talk about the scheduler a little bit later. The scheduler is a place where you can have automated tasks take place in the middle of the night, run reports first thing Monday morning, etc. Right? If you're using the scheduler on this workstation, okay, then you want to turn this on. What that means is that every time you log into Retail Pro on this station, it's going to check to make sure the scheduler is running. If it's not running, it's going to start it. Okay, so this is like a fail-safe. We also set the scheduler to run if you reboot your computer to start automatically. Okay, if that, for whatever reason, doesn't happen, you log into Retail Pro every time, it's going to restart the scheduler if it's not actually running. So this is a good thing to have, right? And if it accidentally gets turned off, you probably won't notice until your scheduler dies, and you have it. It doesn't automatically restart every time you log into Retail Pro. All right. So offline mode. We don't really cover this too much. It gets kind of deep. If you're using offline mode, it just means that you have some secondary databases that you keep locally on the remotes in case you lose internet connectivity on those workstations. This used to be used a lot more before networks got faster, more ubiquitous, and more reliable. Very rarely do people use it. So if this is turned on at your system and you're having problems with it, get some help with one of the techs, right, and have them review with you how your things are set up, because over time you might not actually need to still have that. There are reasons that you do, and that we don't want to go into in this forum. All right, so documents, right? A couple of things in here. Probably just training stuff we don't need to deal with. Workstation defaults. So in tech support, right, we can allow this workstation to use a different default store. So if you have 3 or 4 workstations, and one is going to be like using or processing sales for your web store, and that's a different inventory location. You can set that workstation to use the different inventory location, let's say 6, right? So if you use 6 here, right, all the receipts, vouchers, blah, 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 right, that you've got here are all going to process or default to 6. You can override that if you have permission, okay, but this is one area where we get some tech calls because people either want to do this or they redo their workstation and forget to set this and can't figure out how to make it inventory 6 again. All right, this is where you set your email info that comes with this email receipts comes with version 8, right? Here's where you set it up, what the outgoing email address is, the outgoing SMTP, etc. Right? So if you have to change your SMTP server, right, this is where you change it. I've got this attached to my Gmail because that's easy. If you have your own SMTP server, then you need to know the outgoing connection, right, what port, and whether or not you're SSLing it. Okay. All right, here's where Cayenne gets turned on, right? So if you're using integrated credit cards, which is the only one going forward that is PCI compliant in conjunction with Retail Pro, you would set it up here. I don't have it installed here, so we're going to move on. Okay. Your document sequences are here, right? Not really a tech support type issue, just so you know they're there. And nothing in here that we're going to deal with, right? Okay. So tech support wise, peripherals in here. This is where you turn on or off the following peripheral equipment, right? So a shopper display, if you have a separate poll display, or if you're going through the Cayenne Genius, this is where you would see it, okay? And then cash drawer, if you're using it, what's my cash drawer connected to? Sometimes they're passed through on a printer, sometimes they're a serial port, sometimes they're USB. If they're USB, there's going to be some kind of OPOS driver that's in evidence here, right? And then, so portable barcode, this is for either like the Honeywell Dolphin printer. It can be for Janums, which is an old school printer or old school portable barcode reader that we rent and or used to sell. They're a little obsolete now. So if you're using anything to capture physical inventory counts, right, or if you're using it to scan in items for vouchers or anything like that, this is where you set that up. And same with that. That's your where your Genius would be set up. All right. So what we spent a little time on here, right, is what does this do? Because this is a frontline tech support type thing where we get a lot of calls, right? My receipt's not printing, or my receipt is printing the wrong form, right? Or it's, I had to replace my printer and now nothing will print type of thing, right? So the basics of this are there's sections in here for every type of doc design that Retail Pro has at its disposal, right? So if I was interested in tags, right, I would go to tags. Now it's listing all the Windows printers. My list is a little longer than yours, probably, but that's a tag printer, right? So if I check that, that's going to be my default active printer. Okay, and then here in design, I tell it what, what doc design to default to. You can automatically preview before you get to print if you want. That's what that does. Okay, and then here is how the form length is. So for this printer driver, right, I'm going to let the user decide, right, and let the print driver actually decide how to print this. Okay, so the basics, right? Check off one printer. If you check off more than one printer, you're going to get two prints, one on one printer and one on the other printer, right? So generally, check off one printer. Down here at the bottom where it says allow change at time of printing, right? If you need a choice, if you have more than one tag printer, you want to default to that one, but give me a choice down here to pick the other one in case I want to, right? So you would use this in the tag printing instance if you have more than one, you might have a single printer, but you use more than one type of tag in it. So if you have a split tag and a jewelry tag, okay, those are two different printer instances, right, with different driver settings. Physically, they go to the same printer, but you would have two different printer lines in here, one for the jewelry and one for the split. Okay, or if you look down here where the Z designer is, right? So this is physically the same printer, right? But that's the jewelry instance, and that's the regular instance. Same physical printer, okay? But if you want to have a choice of which one of these to go to, you need a choice of printer and you need a choice of design, okay? Because you have to say, okay, I want to print the jewelry design and I want to point the jewelry design at the jewelry printer. All right, so that's a reason to have these turned on down here. Okay, so still only one default, right? Because you don't want to automatically print more than one tag run, right? But you want to default to this one and give yourself a choice to pick this one or any other printer that happens to be on your Windows list. All right, so that's how to do something like straightforward like inventory tags. Another thing that I like to show people up here, right, so you've got all receipts and then you've got each individual type of receipt down here, including cash drop and some, other like specialized forms, right? So if you click on all receipts and this override is checked, okay, what that means is that all of the settings, right, that may be down under all these individual things, we're going to ignore anything that's down here, right? So if there's anything set in there, doesn't make any difference. If this override is checked, this is the only screen that matters, right? It's going to default to the Vixalon, right? It's going to print that receipt, right? This is the form length, right? Paper size. Generally, with a receipt printer in particular, you want to choose the longest one. Okay, so it doesn't chop your receipt up into small pieces, right? So if it does that, it knows, okay, I can go to that many millimeters, 3276 millimeters before I think about a page break. Okay, all right, so only one, right? If it's override, now you're done, right? Any receipt that you print is going to default to this printer. It's going to default to that design. Done, right? So in the section of receipts, that might not be the best idea because maybe on regular receipts, you want to print this to this printer. Doesn't matter, let's print this, right? And then here's our length, okay? So on the regular receipt, I just want to print this and spit it out, no choices, no nothing. Okay, but if I print a former receipt, in other words, it's a reprint, maybe I want to print a design, okay, that actually says this is a reprint on it. Now I don't know for sure that I actually have one of these, okay, but that's a choice. Okay. The other thing is sometimes we have these, EFT designs, right, that are just a little credit card receipt, right? So if you need a different type of receipt printed depending on what type of transaction you're dealing with, then you uncheck override and then you have to set the defaults for all of these, right? So 50-50 on whether people do this for receipts. Usually when we get down here to like POs and vouchers and stuff like that, right? So say voucher, right? So we've got 4 different kinds of vouchers, but most of the time this is an override for most people, right? So I want it to default to that printer. I want to print this form. Okay, got all these kind of things. I want to default to letter. Okay, no preview, no choices. So what that's going to do is that's going to print to this printer automatically, not going to show it to you, just going to do it. All right, so we go through here and explain that because this is something that a lot of people at the the SysOp level need to go change, right? They swap out a printer, need to go in there and repoint the workstation preferences at the right printer, right? So if I went to purchasing and vouchers, I don't know if I have any vouchers in here. Okay, so vouchers, let's see what I got here. August, do I have any vouchers? No. May. This is data where I brought in just the, nope, where I brought in just the inventory basically to do some testing, and I don't have any documents. But I'll just whip one out here really quick. Okay, vendor code what? DIC. There we go. All right, so if I were to print this now, okay, probably need to be in the right month, right? So back and forth to the month, hit the print, right? So that's going to go automatically out to my printer. I don't need to see it. I don't need to make a choice. It's just going to happen, okay? And I have my POS receipts set up the same way. Okay, so if I reprint here, right, it just yucks out to the printer, of which I do not actually have, so it just gets stuck in my queue, which is fine. All right. All right, so the next thing we cover here, right, we're going to talk about some basic DVS. DVS is Data Verification System, right? This is a tool, right, that gets pretty deep into tech support. We don't get that deep here because it can be kind of dangerous, but what we do is just like a little introduction of what's in there so you know what we're capable of. We just do, just a bare minimum introduction here of DVS. Right, so you find DVS on the Tools menu, down under More, and Data Verification System. Okay, once we launch this tool, you can actually launch it without being in, without kicking everybody out of Retail Pro. There are some areas where you absolutely have to have everybody out of Retail Pro to even get started. Okay, if you're going to write any data back to Retail Pro, you do have to be out of Retail Pro itself. All right, I'm going to put you guys on hold for just a second. In a webinar.
This is from Big Carry Dog. 17, and then this is yours. There's your total. So remember, it's always a year.
Yeah.
In arrears.
Yeah. Thank you.
Hi, Mr. Mulaney.
All right, I should be back. Okay, so there are some sections across the top here. We just talk about in general what these things do, just to give you an idea of what the capabilities you have. So under verification, typically you would maybe use this audit tool to look at what's happened to an item. We're not going to go through that too much. It takes a little bit of background information, and it also takes some data, which I don't have here, documents in particular. But what you can do is go through this, okay, and go through this and audit what's happened to a certain thing or certain item, document by document. All right, so in revision, right, find and replace is something that is a little dangerous to use without a little bit of training, right? But But what you have, just so I can show you a little bit. You can go to here and take everything from one DCS and move it to another DCS, or you can do vendor, right? So if you have a vendor code that's obsolete, you want to start using a new one, and you want to transfer all of the stuff from the old vendor code to the new vendor code, you can do it here. What a lot of people use this for is, over time, they've spelled the word black in their attribute 6 different ways, and they want them all consistent, right? This is a way where you can find everything that's BLK and make it BLACK, okay? So lots of power in this, right? But again, this is something, if you want to go through this with a tech or a trainer specifically to what you want to do the first couple of times, okay, just so you're not making humongous unrecoverable mistakes, because the things that you do in DVS, right, the only recourse once you've done it is to go to a backup, okay, and sometimes that can be a little painful. All right, so find and replace. There's some things in here where you can check to make sure that your item SID is consistent, or that your style SID is consistent. So we take a couple of minutes to explain what a SID is when we're talking about this here. So a SID means a system identifier, right? So this is a unique piece of information that is that every record, right, whether it's an inventory record, a customer record, document, right, they all have them, right? So if I go into inventory and I look at the item, okay, there is a field here that we don't technically that we don't usually display, because it's a long hairy number and nobody, actually, English people actually use it, right? Or the users don't actually use it. Let me throw it on here just so you can see what they look like. Item SID, throw it on here. Style SID, throw it on here. Okay, so out here on the edge, right, that's what I'm talking about. That's an item SID, that's a style SID. So every item has both an item SID and a style SID. An item SID is unique, right? So if this is the same item or same style here, each item is unique. The style SID is the same. That's how we know, or that's how the system knows that all these things belong to a style. Right, so these are assigned by the system. You don't care what these are, right? That's why they're not on the screen, okay? But DVS cares, okay, because this is what the system uses to determine whether that's a unique item, okay? And so if that is unique, it has its own item SID. Sometimes those get out of whack, right? An item SID check can go fix anything automatically that's out of whack. We're not going to take that time to do that today. But that's one thing that revision can do. All right, maintenance, there's a purge function in here, right? And this is used sometimes by, first line sysops, right? I need to purge POs, right? I need to purge SOs, and or purge customers. Sometimes people use this, but most often it's one of these guys, right? And essentially what it does is give you a choice of whether I can archive, or whether I want to work on just my archive POs or my active POs, okay? And then if you're deleting them, you can automatically archive them, okay, or not. Okay, you can just throw them away, right? So it gives you a way to clean up your PO file, your SO file, your TO file, depending on how diligent you are about archiving them or not, right? So if you just have a boatload of POs from 2012 and you just want them gone, okay, that's the way to do it. Okay, there is actually a purge in the archive PO, right, as well, that's similar, but some of those other areas like customers, there's not a customer purge in there. All right, also in here, recalc, so there's some things here, recalc committed and recalc SRO that some people might use. Those also exist out in on the inventory screen, which you could do. So, we won't actually, cover those here, specialized cases for some of this other stuff. So you know, if you're having problems with areas in data like the store credits or the SOs, and you think you might need to do this, get some advice from one of the techs before you try that. Okay, so the main reason we get involved in this for this webinar is to look at DVSing for inconsistencies in data, right? So earlier today, okay, I took this item 114, okay, and I changed in Retail Pro, I edited it, okay, and I changed the vendor code, okay, which, you know, some people do, right? It got set up with the wrong vendor code, it got sold with the wrong vendor code, and now I need to make that the right vendor code. So I created a transaction today with that as the vendor code, okay, and it was DE or DG before, right? So I purposefully broke this, right, so that when I come into DVS and I go to my item SID, okay, under advanced, okay, what it's going to do is it's going to go out after it prompts you to log in. Okay, so this is one of the areas where everybody's got to be out of Retail Pro in order to write back, right? And it's also a dangerous area. So if you get in this bar here and it asks you for the password, okay, and you're not sure what you're doing, get some help. Okay, sysadmin is the password. Okay, it warns you again that you could break your files really bad. Okay, and in here, what I've done is told it just to look at this month's history, because that's where I've got my broken stuff. Because I have a lot of other stuff that's broken that, you know, that doesn't have history, and I didn't want to put you guys through that on this webinar, right? So you can analyze all, okay? You can analyze a small portion of your transactions, right? So if you have, you know, version 8 data going back 10 years and you don't really need to look at the inconsistencies going back 10 years, then don't. But what I'm doing here is I'm looking at these items and I want to find anything that's got differences, right, in description 2, the UPC, the ALU, 3, 4, blah, 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 all that, right? It's going to automatically look at DCS and vendor, okay, because those are part, and description 1, because those are part of the style definition. Okay, so when I start this, it goes and reads everything and comes up with its suggestions, right? So everywhere here where there's a, this is the item SID, right, there's some inconsistency in something, okay? My item SID, I think this was the right one. Nope, the one that I broke. Let me find the one that I broke. DCS vendor code. SID vendor. Where's the one I broke? There's the one I broke. Okay, so it was item number 114, right? And so the inventory, so there's a green eye right here, and it's really hard to see. Okay, so that's the inventory record. The inventory record currently thinks it's vendor DIC, but there's a history document out there that says that the vendor code was DG. Okay, so how do we reconcile this? That's what it's asking the question here. It's going to assume that the current inventory record is the master, right? And it's going to put an M there. So your choice here is to decide whether you want to make this one match that master. If you do, you just highlight this and click the M. It puts a small letter M there. Now those are going to match. All right. So this one was different enough, right? So that it changes the vendor for the item SID, right? So I can go through all the rest of these where I've got like exclamations, right? And exclamation means that it's changed something having to do with the department, the vendor, or the description 1. So here you can see my inventory doesn't have a vendor code on it, and my vendor code is different here, and it's been moved around in DCSs, right? So if I look at this and come out here, I can't really tell, right, if this item, okay, these items were the same as this one, right? So that's kind of a problem because you may not have enough information to actually decide whether these need to be matched. Okay, I'm going to assume this one needs to be matched. So I'm going to go down to this one right here. I'm going to match it. All right, so anyway, you can go through all of these and decide whether or not this is really the same thing or not. Okay, that's probably the same thing. It got a better name here, right? So in this case, let's unmark this. Let's see. No, can't unmark that. You'd have to match that. Anyway, so you can go through and you match them. When you hit next, anything that you've chosen to match, okay, is going to write back to Retail Pro. Okay, and if you were to run the analysis again, those things would not be there. All right, so in here, start, right? So our list that we get over here should be smaller by those handful of things, right? So do you have to resolve all these? Like this one that's got 14, you know, there's no way to know what that thing is. That was probably a miscellaneous item, right? And so that item number 23, right, you should exclude that from your search, right? So if I go back here, okay, and I say item SID, if you use jackpot rows, okay, then you tell the system, you know, 1 through 100, ignore those items because they're jackpot rows, right? So if I do this, I should have a smaller list because these are things that are above 100, and those are true items that, you know, I need to deal with, right? So that's item SID. What have I got here? Really? Okay, match that. All right, so that's item SID, right? There is also a style SID version of this, right? Which, you know, you don't, you know, really want to get too far into, but it's similar, right? So what it attempts to do is find things where, yeah, let's see, I think there were a couple of things that came up on here, yeah, where the style SID didn't match, right? So here's my same thing that where I changed the vendor. Style SID doesn't match on that. Style SID doesn't match on that. So I can say match that one, okay? And this one, I've got a history document that doesn't match. So go ahead and match that. All right, so that cleans that up. Now, do you need to do this? Do you need to do this on a regular basis? I can't really answer that question, okay? But if you have if you are reporting, right, and things don't sort out, like your history documents don't sort out under the right vendor, or they don't sort out under the right DCS, right? That could be a reason why you might want to come in and do this kind of DBS cleanup. If you ever upgrade to version 9, we have to do this cleanup, and we'll do it with you if you so desire. But is this a regular maintenance task? Depends on how good you are about cleaning, or, you know, of changing your data, right? If you change departments, or if you're changing the vendors, or editing the description 1 in your inventory because, you know, somebody typoed it, then that could be a reason why you need to use this tool to get things back, you know, all lined up so they report properly. So when people complain to us about, hey, I ran this report and this item shows up in 3 different places on my report, usually that's you need to go DBS and we can help you figure it out. The only caveat with DBS is you got to be out of Retail Pro. So during the daytime when you're using POS is not a practical time to actually do DBS. Okay, so the last section that we talk about here in this tool is polling, right? So if you're a single store and you don't poll, feel free to drop off or, you know, cease to listen. Okay, we're going to go through basic polling setup in the next like 15, 20 minutes, and then we'll be done. All right, so polling is usually on your side menu here. Sometimes there's a shortcut to it on your desktop. And almost all the time, polling is a scheduled task, right? So I'm going to open up the polling executable. It's a separate executable that you can reach from your Retail Pro directory down at the bottom if you wish, right? So at the core of it, right, under the Stations tab, every remote computer that you talk to, right, it will be on this list. And there's a configuration where you set this up. This does not mean that these are individual stores. In this case, these are individual stores, but this laptop here is what we call an info station, right? So it's not specifically a store, right? But it can be, in this case, it's a remote laptop that has a copy of Retail Pro on it that we can load up and they can take, out to, on a buying trip or whatever and have their Retail Pro data with them, right? So if you have an installation of Retail Pro that is not at your main, where you have a discrete install, then you're going to poll the data back and forth, right? And the basics of polling are, right, process out, which is this icon right here. So proc out reads the database and looks for things that need to be sent to the other side, right? So both sides will proc out. The main will proc out, the remote will proc out. Process in brings the files that have been sent into the database that's local here, right? And the exchange is the process that actually sends stuff back and forth. Now, the main here, right, is a receive only. Okay, the remotes always initiate the polling session. Okay, so I'm going to pop my scheduler up here. I've got an icon down here, right? Because in this scheduler, I have a basic main setup, right? So this exchange function, we start this at the main once a day, right? And it waits overnight for everything to happen, right? So this is the program. We start it at daily at 11 p.m., right? And it runs for, basically it runs forever. Some people have have it killed like at 10 o'clock at night so that we can get a clean start. This one is set so that if you already have it going, right? So don't start if Exchange is still running. Okay, so this works most of the time for people, but occasionally we have some cranky systems where we kill the Exchange at like 10 p.m. so that this one can start clean every day. All right, so that's one piece of the main, right? Start Exchange and leave it running, and that if you're used to this, right now, there's a little lightning bolt icon that appears on your system tray down here. Down here, you can see this dinky little lightning bolt. If that is displayed, that means, that your Exchange is running on whatever workstation you're dealing with the main, right? So we start that at the main. We start that at 11, okay, and then at 12 o'clock in the morning, right, we process in. So this implies that the remotes will communicate the first time between 11 p.m. and midnight. So by the time midnight gets here, we process everything in. Okay, and then let's see. This should be run after process in. Okay, so the process out here, right, we should run it automatically after process in so that we have stuff waiting, right, to go out to the stores. Anyway, so all this is set timing-wise to correspond to the way the remotes are set up. if your timing gets out of whack. Sometimes daylight savings time will do this. Since that's coming up, I feel like I have to mention that. So if you need to check the timing on both sides, you need to know when your remotes are communicating, when your remotes are processing in and out, so that you can check to make sure you're not missing the boat one way or the other with your polling. Okay. Another thing about scheduler, sorry, I need to mention, okay, is this is a schedule, right, that is the default, right? And so up here in options, run on startup, make current default, you need to do that, right? So that if you reboot your computer, it automatically starts this. That's the step one here on this. And then I think I mentioned in the Workstation Preferences, right? Options, Workstation Preferences. Okay, and up here in System, right? No, sorry, Scheduler. Monitor for and restart scheduler. So that's your backup, fail-safe, right? If it doesn't start when you reboot, or if it's died, restart it every time I log into Retail Pro. Okay, back to polling. All right, so going through the actual polling setup, I'm going to pick something that's a store here. I'm going to open up the form. Okay, just go through in general what these fields are, right? So you've got a store station, right? So stores can have multiple stations. So you can have a store that has maybe 10 registers, and each one of them can be, like, it could be store 2A, store 2B, store 2C, right, all the way up. They would each have their own install of Retail Pro on them, and the reason that you might do that is for redundancy, so that if you lose one register, you only lose the one. If they're all networked together, sometime whatever problem you have can bring them all down, and if you have, a busy store, that's not a good thing. Right? So that's one way to set this up. So every computer that we talk to that has an install of Retail Pro on it, right, not a client, but an actual full install of Retail Pro, needs a station file. There's a station file on the main side, and then there's a corresponding station file on the remote side. Okay, so on the main side, right, we're polling over the internet. You can see that here. This login, right, the only thing you care about with the login is that this has to match whatever's set on the remote station, because this is how it handshakes. This is how we know that we're talking to the right station. All right, so it can be 00, we just use a naming convention, use the same station ID and as the login and the password. They can all be sysadmin, they can be, bozo, it doesn't matter, as long as they match the remote station. Okay, on the remotes, the IP address right here where it says main IP address, this IP address is where the remote is pointing the communication session, right? So the main station has to have what we call a static public IP, right? And then the ports that polling uses, which is ports 20,000 through 20,010, that has to be port forwarded from that static public IP to the Retail Pro server. That, we don't actually cover that here, but if you look on a remote, you will have main IP address, right, will be filled in, and that's how it knows where to send the exchange. Okay, so nothing else in here that we need to talk about. Checklists. This part is what we're sending back and forth, right? So the top sections here where it says main to remote, all of these areas are all what's going out from here, right, down to the remote, right? All those except for this bottom one, right? And so in here, what are we sending, right? So if let's take inventory for instance. So if we look at inventory, we are set to differences. That means if we make a change in the inventory file, like we sell something, we add a new item, we make any changes to that, that goes on the list as an inventory difference, and it'll get picked up and sent when we do a process out. right? So that's what differences mean. None, of course, means don't send it. All means send the whole inventory file, right? So if I edit this, let's do this. We'll check the whole prices file, right? So send the whole prices file, which is a separate, that's where all the price levels are. A separate file, then send the whole inventory file, right? And then this all if changed, right? This is just for the files that are small, like the DCS file is really small. So there's no reason to send just the changes. If we changed it, send the whole file, right? Vendor file. If we changed it, send the whole file, right? So that's what these all mean, okay? For the most part, if something is differences, that's what you want to send, okay? Because if it's not differences, it's going to be all if changed, okay? If you're sending those things down at all, right? So that's the way it is for inventory. For customers, right, we only want to send differences. For preferences, you know, if we change something at the main, right, like the tax areas, right, we want to send that. We'll send the whole file to everyone. Okay. If we change something like employees, right, we want to send the whole thing, right? If you're centrally controlling your employees, which most people do in version 8, you add an employee here, we want the whole thing to go down to all the stores. All right. Documents, this is where you have a choice, right? Do you send sales receipts, right, to all the stores, right? Okay. All right. So these are areas where generally things are set and they don't change, right? And so I'm going to cancel out of here. So the other other thing we talk about here is this remote, right? So you have a limited ability to update the schedule of what comes back up from the remote here, right? So this remote to main here, this is what the remote should be sending, okay? And we can force this down to the remote by checking off this right here. Remote schedule, edit, this right here. And that's really all. Generally, though, if you're going to do this, talk to the techs about whether or not your particular situation makes that a thing that you want to do. All right, so this is all you know, set, ready to go. And then the last thing that we talk about concerning polling is regenerating versus analyzing, or I'm sorry, initializing, right? So initializing means send the whole file, basically, right? So like this laptop, right? It's been turned off for a while. Got the red X means it's actually disabled. But if I needed to start that sucker up again, right, I pick that, right, and I'm going to initialize all the files out to it. Now, does that build a great big hairy thing to send out there? Yes, it does, right? So you do want to be careful with this, but if you're setting up a new computer, right, or updating one that's been offline for a while, right, then if you click over here in initialize group, right, you're going to check all these, right? If you don't need them all, like if I just wanted to send inventory and prices, I check them individually, right? One thing that we cover when we do this is a lot of people initialize employees. If you add an employee at the main, okay, and put them in a group with sysadmin, you need to send the employees, right? A lot of times you're going to want to send the shift as well in case that's changed. You want to send employee here, right? And then you also want to send the security groups. Okay, so if you have added a new employee, or if you've changed anything about the sec admin and you want to make sure that those stores have all of that, and you check all those things off, check off the store here. When you click OK, right, it's going to build those files. Okay, and here it goes, building those files, and get those ready for the exchange to take place. Right. Hopefully I haven't locked myself out. There we go. Okay. For too long. Okay. So that's initialize. Initialize means send the whole file. Regenerate, on the other hand, is selecting documents. So you've lost your history for some reason, right? Regenerate only documents made at the destination station, or regenerate documents made at all stations. You know, can't really advise you on which of those is appropriate. Depends on the situation. Okay, but you can regenerate sales receipts and or vouchers and or slips. Okay, and you have a date range, right? And then you have a station, right? So if you were regenerating on this side, you would say, you know, regenerate all of, you know, Burlington's data, right? And you could pull all the sales files off of this system, send it down there. So in that case, usually would be to, because there's data missing on one side or the other, right? So if we somehow lost a sales file at a store for, you know, March of 2017, we could regenerate it and send it back down. So regenerate, taking your history, whatever your documents are, sales receipts or sales vouchers, slips, send them down to a remote, or vice versa. If we lose the main and you don't have a backup, this is one way that we could try to get some of your history backup consolidated on the main. It's not ideal, but it does exist. Okay, so that in general covers what we have on our agenda to deal with. You know, we're looking at you know, basic tech support here for version 8. If that you have further questions that didn't get covered here, you can peruse through our video library looking for the other V8 tech support webinars from the past. There are a couple of them out there. One's one I did and one is one that Jeff did. And you can look through those, see if you get a different insight, or you can also email or call in service if you feel like you need more training or you have a specific case that you want to deal with it. Give us a call. We'll set up an appointment, right, and try to get your answers for whatever it is. All right, thanks very much for your attention.